Hi, welcome everyone to today's presentation. Today, Magdi, Michelle, and Jinky will be talking about food and climate, the impacts of climate change on agriculture. So this is our second April call, and it's the 22nd at 14 o'clock GMT. And we're really excited because in 2 days it's going to be Earth Day! Woohoo!
Yay!
My favorite day of the year. So I hope you're all excited. I hope we get a fabulous presentation today, and I have no doubt we will. So I'll hand over to you three to get started.
Okay, awesome. So I'm Michelle. I don't know if my other group members want to say hi or just not. But we thought we'd do kind of like a fun question to start everything. And we thought we'd ask if you guys could be any kind of food, what would you be? I can go first, and I thought that I would be like a potato pancake because who doesn't love potatoes in the shape of a pancake? So what kind of food would you guys be?
I'll go next. So I want to be a sinigang. Sinigang is a Filipino food. It is loved by many Filipinos and other nationalities. So I want to be a sinigang because actually it's my comfort food. So I want to give comfort or happiness to the people around me, just like sinigang. So that's it.
Oh, that's super sweet. Maggie, do you want to share what kind of food you eat?
You hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, great. Actually, I love food. I love every type of food here in Egypt, especially desserts. I love desserts a lot. But talking about veggies, I like cucumber, tomato, and I told you before that I'm now trying to cultivate it in my home, as I love it. So yeah, that's it.
Nice. Does anyone else want to share what food they'd be?
This might be a bit of wishful thinking, but I think I'd be a brownie. I would like to be a brownie because it's sweet and chocolatey. I mean, I guess I'm not necessarily chocolatey, but I like to think I'm sweet. And then like sometimes it's got like a hard crust on the outside because I'm tough, but then gooey inside.
Super cute. Anyone else?
Okay, I will be just salad with lemon because every salad is better with lemon.
Okay.
Alvaro and I have a running joke that salad should have dressing on it, not just lemon, because in Chile they just put lemon on it.
Really?
And like if they put oil on it, it's just like canola oil. And I'm like used to like an Italian balsamic vinaigrette or something like that. And so he likes to rub that in my face.
Oh, okay. Well, now I understand that. Okay. All right. Well, then we'll get started. Okay. So our presentation is about the impacts of climate change on agriculture, and we're going to be looking at our respective countries. So the Philippines, Egypt, and the United States. So how does climate change affect agriculture? So we have four things that we listed. So like atmosphere, sea temperatures are going to rise and increase. The intensity and frequency of timing and location for rainfall and snowfall is going to change, and we're going to see more extreme weather events and variability increase. So basically what it comes down to is that agriculture is super dependent upon our climate. And climate change ultimately reduces that predictability of weather patterns. So just to kind of elaborate a little bit on that, we all know that like crops require certain growing conditions, such as a certain temperature, soil moisture, nutrient levels, water availability, sun exposure, that kind of stuff. And so when we see weather variations, that's ultimately going to reduce, like crop output. We talked about like droughts. The intensity and the frequency of droughts will increase. I mean, droughts in general aren't new, but they're going to be intensified, and this is going to severely impact areas that are already water constrained. Like temperature and sea level rise is going to affect fisheries. Extreme weather events are just going to affect everything. They could destroy an entire field. And then also we'll see like increased temperature can also affect the ability to raise livestock. So agriculture greatly depends on weather predictability, and ultimately climate change is going to change that predictability and reduce it, and that impacts global food security. So with that, our presentation is going to look at fisheries, crops, and livestock, and then also our respective countries. And so with that, I will hand it over to Jinky.
Yay. Thank you, Michelle. So now we move on to the specifics of specific impacts of climate change to different sectors under agriculture. So first is fisheries. So overfishing and water pollution have long been a problem in the fishing industry even before climate change. But with the addition of climate change in the picture, the problem in the fishery sector has only become bigger. As Michelle already mentioned earlier, sea temperature have increased significantly over the years because of climate change. We all know that fish are cold-blooded species, that they are directly affected by temperature, meaning they are very sensitive to temperature changes. Of course, this affect their activity, their feeding habits, their composition, their distribution, among others. And due to climate change, their migration pattern and timing of their reproduction have changed. Marine organisms tend to move to colder areas, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think one of the main reasons behind this is that it has something to do with the level of oxygen present in the water, since oxygen dissolves easily in cooler water than a warmer one. And of course, we all know how vital it is for fish, for the whole marine organisms, oxygen. So the problem here is that once they move to cooler area, to cooler water, they face a new problem, and that is increased competition for resources. So next slide, please. Okay. So, sorry, next slide.
All right, hang on. It's not. Oh, there we go.
Oh, there. So there. Higher sea temperature does not only affect the fish itself, but also the coral reefs that serve as their habitat, their source of food, as we can see in the picture. When subject to thermal stress, in this case, increased temperature of water, corals lose their color and turn completely into white, and we call that phenomenon coral bleaching. In coral bleaching, the corals are not they're not actually dead, but their mortality rate is increasing. Also, in addition, we know that our ocean is a huge carbon sink, right? So carbon sink meaning it has the ability to absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And we also know that a huge amount of carbon dioxide is present in our atmosphere right now due to human activities like burning of fossil fuels, um, and other stuff. And given this situation, there's too much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Our oceans, our water, is absorbing too much carbon dioxide in it. As a result, the acid level in the ocean water is increasing, and we call this phenomenon ocean acidification. And according to studies, according to research, ocean acidification threatens our marine ecosystems, and one of the major examples is how it affects the growth of the marine life. So next slide, please. So we move on now to water resources. Water is life. Yes, agree, right? Water is necessary for all living organisms to survive, even as humans. 70% of our bodies is made up of water, and we need water for various needs like clean and safe water for to sustain our health, for drinking. We also need water for agriculture, energy production, navigation, recreation, manufacturing, etc. But with climate change, our water resources are under threat. And these threats includes like increase in evaporation rates due to increased temperature, runoff season is earlier and shorter, the water temperature increases as I've mentioned earlier, and the quality of water is also decreasing. And of course, these impacts are mostly being felt by countries located in most dry subtropical regions. And I think Egypt is part of that region. Next slide, please. Thank you. Of course, when there's shortage in water, one of the primary affected sectors the crops of um, but the changes in climate may be beneficial for some types of crops, but for others, it is detrimental to their production. The effect of increased temperature will depend on the crop's optimal temperature for growth and reproduction, because in some crops um, tend to produce more in a warmer temperature. So in some areas, warming may benefit the types of crops that are typically planted there, and farmers may opt to shift to crops that are currently grown in warmer areas. But of course, there's always a limit in everything. So when higher temperature exceeds the crop's optimum temperature, their yields will decline whether or not they're located or planted in warmer areas. Um, Carbon dioxide levels also affects the crops, especially their nutritional value, and of course, it has a direct impact to our health. Next slide. Um, of course, there's also the problem of increased extreme weather events, as mentioned by Michelle earlier, like typhoons, flooding, and droughts. These can totally destroy the crops, therefore reducing their yield production. And we should also take note of the fact that many weeds, pests, and fungi thrive under warmer temperatures, wetter climates, and increased carbon dioxide levels. And we know weeds compete with food crops for essentials to survive, like water, nutrients, sun, etc. And more weeds, more pests, more fungi means more pesticides, more fertilizers, more herbicides to be used. And we all know that these chemicals are not only harmful to our health, but these chemicals are also contributing to the greenhouse gas emission. And as we know, greenhouse gases are one of the main drivers of climate change. And in fact, agriculture is the second biggest greenhouse gas contributor in the world, next to the energy sector. So next slide. Here, climate change also has impacts to the livestock sector. Increase in temperature affects most of the critical factors for livestock production, such as water availability, production and quality of their food, their feeds, animal production, reproduction, and their health. So, next slide. This is the last slide under the specific impacts of climate change. And here, price inflation. So, research already say that climate change has driven up food prices by as much as 20% over the recent decades. There's an increase in prices of foods because of the issues of low yields, high cost of food production, and of course, the increasing demand for food. And the important question to ask here is that which sector of the society is mostly affected by the increase in food prices? Of course, it's not the rich, and but it is the marginalized sectors. It is usually the poorest of the poor, our very own small food producers, um, like our small farmers or small fisher folks. Usually, they are part of the poverty sector, and it's just ironic to think that these people work so hard in their fields to plant crops. They go to the ocean as early as 3 a.m. to catch fish, and yet most of the time they are the ones who can eat at least 3 times a day. So, in this, given these impacts, we can see that climate change is really real. We can no longer deny that it is a hoax, unlike contrary to the statement of Trump before. And its effects have become increasingly evident worldwide. And the worst thing about climate change is that it slowly kills our planet, our people, especially those that are part of the poverty sector. And the next slides will show us that climate change is indeed real and we have to do something about it as soon as possible. So here we will discuss the impacts of climate change in the Philippines, in Egypt, and USA. So first is the case of the Philippines. So there. Philippines is ranked fifth among the most vulnerable countries to climate change impacts. Top five among the countries, whole world. And one of the reasons is that it is an archipelagic country, meaning it is a group of islands surrounded by bodies of water, and a large part of its population is living in coastal areas. It is also a tropical country, and we've mentioned earlier that climate change have negative impacts to the crop production in tropical and temperate regions. Um, one of the main one of the major problems here in the Philippines is the occurrence of extreme weather events like typhoons, droughts. Um, before we only here in the Philippines we only experienced typhoons with signal number 1, 2, 3, but in the previous years these typhoons have increased in their intensity. We now experience typhoons with signal numbers 4, 5, and we call it super typhoons. And I think the best example for this is the super typhoon Haiyan, if you've heard about it in the news. It hit the Philippines last November 2013, and it is one of the most powerful typhoon ever recorded in history, wherein billions worth of property, agricultural crops were destroyed, and around 5,000 people died. Some are still missing up to now, and thousands were displaced, lost their homes, lost their livelihood, and almost yeah, right. It's almost 5 years since the disaster happened. The victims still did not get the justice and support they deserve from our government. Of course, there's also the drought situation in the country. And just last 2016, 2 years ago, we've experienced the El Nino crisis, the drought crisis. And one of the most affected areas was the what we call the food basket here, the food basket of the country. Because of extreme heat, There was a decline in the amount of clean drinking water in the area and the water needed for agricultural purposes. Crops were destroyed, different pests attacked the crops. Farmers were left with no food to eat in their plates. And in fact, some residents were even forced to eat wild yam as a replacement to rice and corn. And there were also reports that some farmers shifted to other jobs because, of course, they cannot did, um, profit anymore from farming since they've lost all their crops. And because of the food scarcity in the area, the farmers organized a protest to demand help from the government. However, instead of helping them, they were blocked by the military forces and later on resulted to violence. Instead of giving the farmers the rice they wanted, gunfires were given to them by the military forces. Because of that incident, at least 2 farmers died and more than 100 were injured in the said massacre. And like what happened in Typhoon Haiyan, no justice was given to the victims up to now. You see, climate change does not only result to these things to like to like uh, decrease in agricultural output, loss of livelihood, hunger and malnutrition, displacement, price inflation. But it also threatens the very life of the people, especially of the poor. And of course, as I always say, we have to act now before it's even too late that you know there's no like there. So next reporter will be Magdi, and he will be reporting about Egypt.
Okay. Are you with me now?
Mhm.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jinky. Hello, guys. So after knowing the effects of climate changes on food production and security in Philippines, and we now have an overview of what effects does climate change do on the food security. I'm now going to talk about these problems, specifically in Egypt and in at Africa and the Middle East in general. So developing countries are the most threatened by drastic impact of climatic changes on agriculture and food security, as their economic is actually linked to agriculture and large proportion of their populations depends directly on agriculture and agriculture-related business. So Egypt has a dry and hot weather, especially in summer, and with middle winter season and rain over the coastal areas. And data collected by the Egyptian Meteorological Authority and the local universities for the period between 1961 and 2000 indicated that there is a general trend towards warming of the air temperature with increase in number of hazy days, misty days, turbidity of the atmosphere, frequency of sandstorms, and hot days. So Egyptian communications reports, which were prepared by the Egyptian Environmental Affairs Agency, reported that Egypt is one of the most endangered countries in all sectors. Also, projected climate changes may have disastrous effects on agriculture production in the Arab world, including Egypt. And a number of studies have shown that increased temperatures cause much higher water needs in summer crops. So water scarcity in Egypt is projected to increase rather than decrease. And therefore, agriculture in the Chern and Arab regions security is highly endangered to climate change, with a risk of 50% decrease actually in food production if the current practices still continue. So according to the World Bank, Egypt is one of the potential endangered countries to the effect of global warming and negative environmental consequences of climate warming, which represents in the rise of sea level and water scarcity, agriculture and food insufficiency, and also some pressures on human health as well. So I will focus on two important factors which are the most affected cases by the climate change. The first is climate change impacts on water and sea level and agriculture areas. And the second is impacts of climate change on strategic crops in Egypt. So firstly, the future predictions of average temperature in Egypt as a result of global warming is predicted to increase by 40 degrees Celsius in Cairo and about 31 to 57 or 47, sorry, in the rest of Egypt by 2016. As a result, Egypt will suffer from rising in the Mediterranean Sea by a level about 5 meters, and this will lead to flooding the coastal areas along the Nile Delta, which is most cultivated part of Egypt's land. And actually, the food production and supply would be deeply affected. So, on the other hand, the remaining areas of the Nile Delta would also be affected with the salt water from the Mediterranean Sea, which will contaminate the fresh groundwater used for irrigation. The second thing is the impacts of climate change on strategic crops in Egypt. As agricultural activities and self-sufficiency of food will expose to an additional effect as a result of temperature increase. The decline in agricultural activities due to temperature increases is expected to range from 9 to 60%. The reduction of the strategic crops will achieve significant reduction by 2015. 50, sorry. So the production of wheat will reduce by 19%. And if the temperature increased by 4 Celsius degrees, the reduction will be 36%. Also, the production of the rice will be reduced by 11%. The production of maize will be reduced by 19%. And also, there will be a great loss in other crops like soybeans, cotton, which will be decreased about 17%. And if the temperature increased by 4 Celsius degrees, the reduction will be about 31%. So now we need to know that all these crops are the most important crops we cultivate in Egypt here. So they are also the backbone of financial exports and the economy here in Egypt. So that was an overview of the climate changes in Egypt and food production here and food security. It was a quick overview of the condition in the Arabian world and Africa. And now we will move on to the case study in the US with Michelle. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay. So I think a lot of the issues that you will see in other countries are going to kind of follow suit in the United States as well. Not necessarily the specifics, but the general pattern we see. Just to give you guys a little perspective, agriculture is a huge part of the U.S. economy. So like food production generates over $300 billion to the U.S. economy per year. Agriculture and food sectors add over $750 billion to the U.S.'s gross domestic product. And American farmers provide 25% of the grains in the global market, which is your wheat, corn, and rice. So it's fair to say that agriculture is a big part of the U.S. economy. So any impacts that we have on our production of food is going to impact our economy. As we've already kind of touched on, food production is greatly dependent on our climate. So the changes that we would see in weather here would affect like our growing seasons, and that would impact U.S. farmers and fisheries, and they would have to definitely adjust what they already know and what they're used to. Some crops will usually see, like, as Jinky mentioned, an initial increase in yields because they like the warmer temperature. But for the most part, we would see a decrease in yields and a reduced nutritional value. And since agriculture is such a huge part to the U.S. economy, if we have a decrease in our outputs, that would mean that we would have to decrease how much we export. And that's also going to affect our food prices here. Some of the issues that we would face internally would be our own stable U.S. food supplies and U.S. food security, especially with, you know, a growing population. If we have less food, a lot of people are going to suffer, especially those that are already struggling to buy food within the United States. As Jinky already mentioned, those that are already in poverty are going to be the ones that are hit the hardest. What else did I want to say? It's kind of on the same vein then, that with a decreased output, that's also going to affect other countries that depend on the U.S. for exports. I mean, it's mostly just going to be a question of food security, and you know, I think it's going to have to really force the United States to have to focus on itself and being able to provide food. You know, we already face those kind of issues with hunger, but I feel like I personally feel like with climate change, it's going to kind of be more of a wake-up call, and that we would really have to focus on addressing, you know, food prices and especially our practice of farming. We do a lot of like monoculture, so we'll grow, you know, fields and fields and fields of one type of crop, and you know, that's just not sustainable in the long term, especially when you're spending all this energy and water and all these resources on growing corn or soybeans, and then it's going to feed livestock instead of directly feeding people. And I think it's going to have to come down to a change in how the United States goes about their agricultural system and how they grow food. You know, perhaps maybe not doing such a massive scale of monoculture, you know, maybe more focusing on diverse crops and maybe less on, you know, livestock. Although I think a problem that you would run into there is that livestock is a huge part of, you know, the American diet. Americans consume over 36 million metric tons of meat and poultry per year. So I think it's gonna be a wake-up call, and it's going to cause everyone to kind of question what we already know as far as what system is going to work in the future, because what we're doing now is not going to work with changing of weather patterns. So I think a lot of research is going to be needed and rethinking for how we're going to combat these changes in the future. And with that, I will pass this to Maggie, and we'll talk about possible solutions.
Okay. So as we know that climate change is something that we can't actually stop. We may be able to delay it, but we can't stop it forever. So actually, sooner or later we will have to face it, and we should be prepared for it. So we can be prepared for it by using some rules or putting some rules in agriculture practicing to minimize those effects. And also, if it's not planned and financed, that will increase the risk of malnutrition and hunger among populations. So some possible rules we can use is using modern technology and genetic engineering to grow modified plants and crops and that can have a resistance to high salt level in the water, and that has also a good resistance to the hot weather and hot air temperature. Also, we need to use a less water-intensive crops. These types of crops use less water in their growing. We can also use new irrigation methods like dropping irrigation that will actually reduce the water usage about 90%. Also, we need to use new way in the farming like hydroponic and aquaponic, as these type of farming um, save the plants from the high temperature and the bad weather we face and will face in the future. And also, it will give us a high production, which we will need in the next periods. Um, and the last thing is, which is actually the most important thing, is the awareness. We need to tell the farmers what we are going to face in the future and to learn them, to make them learn how to face these problems and how to do the right practice in agriculture and in irrigation, and to stop using the usual irrigation methods and try to use more modern methods. So that was some possible solutions that we can use for preparing to face climate change in the future. And next, we have a video that shows some great effects in our future, which will be because of the climate change. And Michelle will show us this video. Okay, Michelle?
Okay.
Well, that's terrifying.
That was Amtrak's. I read it well. Amtrak's.
Yes. So,
Okay.
so those
So,
are some of the bacteria and stuff that were frozen. And I don't know if Maggie wants to talk about the video since he found it. Otherwise, I can, but it doesn't matter. Is he still there?
yeah. It's like I always see about permafrost melting and losing methanos or other gases to the to the atmosphere. But now with the bacteria thing, that is completely new for me and was very, very scary.
Yeah, I agree. And it's just another I guess another area of climate change that a lot of people aren't aware of. And I think that kind of ties into food production in the sense that, like, with increase in temperature and stuff, there could be other factors that affect agriculture that are out of our control, like maybe bacteria or something like that, or a certain type of pest or something that we don't have a natural predator for per se. But I think this could be a good part of the presentation for anyone that has questions or anything or any comments or concerns that they'd like to share. Anything? What kind of impacts do you think that climate change would have in your country? Do you think that they would be similar to the stuff that we kind of talked about in our slides, or do you think that they would be different?
Okay, I will start.
Thank you.
As you know, or at least I don't know, I am a teacher, but I am an agricultural technician too. I am an agricultural technician too. So for us in Chile, climate change affect the food production because is expanding some plagues than in other times where just in some parts of the country. Cause for the cold parts, for example, potatoes disease, and then is a fungus one, was for at least 100 years out of the south part of Chile. In the last years, with the warm temperatures, it now is in the south part of Chile, in Chiloé, that is an island with 256 type of native potatoes that are very important for them because they are now Iceland like very special, and they were by 100 years free of every potato diseases, and now they have it, and that changed a lot of things because they produce without any chemicals for the last 100 years, and now they need chemicals for agricultural to fight this disease, and that is an important change. Organic crops pass to chemical crops or traditional agricultural just because climate change. That is an important thing, I think. Then the expanse of some diseases of potatoes from vineyards to for scarlet carosos that is like um, beaches and other things. So that is very important, like the expansion of diseases. And the other thing is that we have a larger rain season and larger hot season than in the past. In the past, we have more like forestation climate, and now we have two stations, like winter and summer, and that affect a lot because we have to do a bigger pozos, Sarah, pozo, like for taking water. You have with
Deeper wells.
okay deeper wells. Sorry, we have deeper wells. Like in the past, you find the water in 6 meters, 10 meters, 30 meters was the most like uh, deeper well. Now we have 100, and the bigger one that I know, the deep one is 250 meters to find water, and that is very expensive. So if you are a big company, we have big companies here where I live for like wine production. They have the money to do it. Like, okay, it's just 250. It's like $2 million, and it's fine for them. But for the other people, like if you are a little agricultural production, so you don't have $2 million to do in a well. So you are fuck up. Sorry. So you're a screw. Because you don't have $2 million. And the big enterprise, they have it because it's Conchitoro and other ones that are the big ones. They have it, they have the money. So this increased the poverty of the little agricultural people. And it's a big problem now in Chile. Then we have the big companies and the poor people in the other side. The big companies in Chile, we have the technology and resources for fight against these problems when you have a company, when you have a big company. But you don't have the resources, the technology is there, but you can buy it if you are a poor people, if you live just in your land, in a little amount of land, or you are a little agricultural, you have a very big problem now.
Yeah, those are some really good points. Do you think that government is going to play a role in helping smaller productions, like smaller farmers and stuff, to get those resources?
Now, like we are working. Okay, the government is working in creating new like fountains of water for all the people. They are working in this, but it's going to pass some time until this was ready. For example, for my town, they are going to take some fount of water for everyone, but this will take 5 years at least, because they need to do some. It's an aqueduct. They will take at least five years, because the fount of water is like 200 kilometers from here. So they will have a really large aqueduct, and they will be really good for us, but it's 5 years. So if you have a big enterprise, 5 years is not too much. But if you are a poor person, waiting for the water is too many time. So they are doing something, but the water problem in Chile was really fast to create. So the government is acting now, but it's a little late because it was too fast for us.
And it should be noted that in Chile, the water resources are privatized.
Yeah, it's like, okay, that is a thing. Like, our water is not private in the like poor sense of the word, but you need to pay something for the access to the water. For like potable water, like the can water have a price, obviously, and is in private companies, then that is not really good, at least in my vision of the world. And the other forms of water, like rivers and stuff, you need to pay something for the government to have it, a little amount. So what is the problem? The problem is the same. Like if you are rich, you could pay with any problem, and if you are poor, you you have problems sometimes. It's not like really expensive, but if you have a company before you in the line of the water, sometimes the company take too much and you don't have to take it, and you don't have anything to take. That is a bigger problem in our water legislation. Not the price because it's low, I think, but the access. If you have a big company before you, they take, and you don't have anything for taking because you are like under the river. For example, you have the companies here in the river and you are there. The company take all the water and you are just die.
That's terrible. I feel like that's a really common problem everywhere, in a bunch of different areas, especially water constrained areas of the world. And that, it's interesting because um, since there's been a whole lot of denial with climate change for a long time, I feel like it's really gonna, as you said, it's gonna take a lot of time for us to kind of catch up. And the people that are going to be affected the most are those that don't have any resources to get the stuff that they need, such as water. And it's for me, it'll be interesting to see, if this is something that is going to be addressed by the governments, or if this is something that is going to take all of us to kind of step up and demand that something be done about it, whether it be regulations or whether it be more like of a corporate social responsibility sort of initiative from different companies all over the world, especially those that are in different countries, such as the ones that you were talking about. And it's also interesting to see like what kind of priority system that will be addressed with water, especially when it comes to like agriculture. I feel like in the United States, a lot of water is gone to food production, and there's not like a set regulation on how much they can take. In some instances, you see like aquifers and groundwater, being severely, depleted and not given enough time to recharge because they're constantly taking, water from them. So,
Yeah, now they have a proposition to change the law to do like you say, you already said, like to put some limits on the companies will take, and that is important. Like to limit the flux than they could take. It's really important because they will have a limit, so the river could have sufficient water for every other people in the downline. They are like trying to pass this law now, and the people is like fighting because it's very important for smaller agricultural people.
I do agree with that. You know, I don't know. It's interesting because I feel like water is one of those resources which there isn't really any, uh, you know, set like category for. Like we don't necessarily condemn it as something that you know, is like every other kind of product where, you know, it's you know, like rationed, or is it, you know, if it's a free for all, or if there should be a limitation, or, you know, if certain people should have priority over it versus others. I feel like there's, you know, a lot of discussion that needs to be made on those kind of resources still, and we really aren't having those conversations, which is a huge issue. So,
Abdullah, did you want to speak about your the case in Egypt and your perspective about how climate change is affecting food resources?
Hello, everyone.
Hey.
I wanted to firstly to say thanks everyone who participate in this work. This awesome work. And secondly, I want to ask one question. You mentioned a lot of things about the future result of climate change on agriculture. Are these effects scientifically proven, or that's all speculation? Do you understand?
Yes. Yeah, most of this data comes from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is an international body that is funded by the UN. Excuse me, I'm getting a little sick. And they have been able to prove that all these effects are happening and that they're linked to climate change, and that the climate change is linked to human behavior.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks.
How about, can we get a Nepalese or Jamaican perspective on food resources? Yeah, go ahead, Adrian.
Well, from a Jamaican perspective, most of our water reserves are from surface runoff, so we don't have as much wells as from Chile. And most of those wells are private wells on persons' properties, and they have to get a permit to dig those wells in the first place. So a few years ago, we had a major, I think I spoke about this in the last webinar I attended, that we had a major drought that spanned 2 years that affected everything from sanitation to agriculture to, yeah, well, just pretty much everywhere, everything. I personally got affected through being infected by a disease that was not in Jamaica before, chikungunya. So for us, it's more than just about food. The water issue is more than just about food. But in terms of more agricultural production system, it's usually affected mostly by pests and diseases and drought. But I also wanted to, there's a recommendation on one of the slides that I was able to view in terms of crop adaptation. I kind of want to caution on that particular recommendation because it hinges so very close to the proliferation of synthetic biology, which if anyone knows about it, it includes things like living modified organisms and GMOs, right? So if you're going to look at fiddling around with making more resilient crops in quote, you could also do more damage to the resilience of the ecosystem by putting that out there, because we don't have so much research in the general field about that area. So some of the research that has been done has seen an homogenization of certain very closely related species, and you don't want homogenization because it's linked very closely to monoculture, right? So you might not necessarily want to, yes, it's a good recommendation on paper, but I think there needs to be a lot more research that's done because resilience comes in diversity, right? You don't want to put that out there and then homogenization happens, and in quote, it's more resilient to salt or it's more resilient to temperature rises, but then something else happens in the climate change variable that knocks out your food system anyway, because it's more than it's not like these negative effects happen in isolation. The ecosystem is called an ecosystem because it's a system, it interacts with each other. And coming from a small island developing state perspective, we are inundated a lot by the bigger producers, and that's not just from developed countries like the US or China, but also from areas like Brazil and even other countries from South America, where they have large expanse of lands that they can put into much higher production. And so sometimes that flood our markets, right? So you have to look at economies of scale. So a lot of persons might say, but if these other countries are producing their own crops in such a way that they can send you stuff, it improves your food security. I would argue against that because, for example, if you choose, if something happens to your country and you're not able to produce enough to send to us in a particular year, and it has not negatively impacted our food systems, we won't be able to produce our own food in the future to actually buffer against that kind of perspective. So you have to look at economies of scale. One more thing I would like to say, going back on the ecosystem-based approach in terms of managing water resources. We're not talking enough about biodiversity and using our own local indigenous biodiversity to defend against food scarcity in a climate changing world. Meaning a lot of the pests and diseases that we're being exposed to can be defended against by preserving our natural ecosystems. A lot of persons like to, and I hear Alvaro speaking about new diseases coming in from into organic lands, if you and that being buffered by pesticides, right? But the thing is, if you spray pesticides, you're actually putting yourself in a much deeper loop than just dealing with the diseases. So if and I know from speaking to my friends in Colombia, they speak a lot about agroecology, which is the next step along the organic chain. And if you preserve your natural enemies, you can indeed deal with a lot of these pests and diseases that are proliferating in your ecology systems. And we're in Jamaica, we've just kind of solidified the organic standard into our Bureau of Standards here. A few years, there were some IP issues that we had to deal with because I was on that team that from an organization that they adopt our standards to the national level. So just protecting our ecosystem, protecting our biodiversity will in fact protect our food systems. It will protect our water systems. It will make us more resilient. Thanks.
That was awesome. Thank you, Adrian. Yeah, to make our crops more resilient to climate change, we need to have that diversity and really focus on seeing how plants can help, or how the ecology can really help protect our plants and our food crops from really facing the effects of it. Whether it's planting more trees to protect from sandstorms in areas that are being deserted, that are turned into deserts, or like all the suggestions that you made about just planting in a biodiverse area or in a biodiversity instead of focusing on monocultures. And being from the US, sorry for sending you so much subsidized grain. That's one of the big things that I've done some research on is the US Farm Bill, which subsidizes certain crops, all industry funded, this bill. And we subsidize dairy, we subsidize soy, corn, and wheat, and then we just export it around the world. And it's had devastating effects on other economies where different countries where they don't have those subsidies, so they can't sell it that cheap, and it hurts our farmers too in the process. So
that is called pitching and is illegal, but just the US use it to do every time with any consequences.
Woohoo! Sorry guys though, really, I really am sorry. All right, did anyone have any final comments on this issue?
Okay, I found it really interesting, like the part that Jinky, yeah, Jinky is your name, it's fine. Okay, that was very interesting when she linked the climate change to violence. I think that is very important, like with the protest and stuff, protest with people that is going to jail and is going to be dead in the protest. And it's very important. We have some protest about environmental stuff I think 2 years ago in the south part of Chile, because a big company put some contamination in the sea, like directly without any permission or any care of this. And the people do big protest and fight against carabineros, that are our military police and stuff. So that was very big stuff. And it's important to see that too. Normally we link it poverty, gender, and environmental change or climate change. But we have a new stuff enter with a big force now, that is the violence related to. The people is going to make protests, is going to fight one with the others for the land, for the water, and other stuff. So the climate change is increasing the violence too. And I think that is very interesting to notice every day more, like put attention there. Like we have some episode of violence related to climate change. And that is very interesting than Jinky said.
Alvaro, were you talking about the red tide? Marea Rojo?
Okay, the red tide was not produced by the salmon stuff. It's different things, but these people was really pissed off for the salmon stuff, and later they have red tide. So they live from the sea, from taking seashells and other stuff.
Shellfish.
Shellfish,
Mhm.
seashells, and no, but seashells, like a lot of sea products, crabs, and other stuffs. So they live from this. And when you have some amount of contamination in your sector, the sanitary services of Chile make a provision of taking out sea products of that part of the country. So it's a really big problem, because these people live in a linked economy. They, for example, you have a fisherman that always take cod and crabs, and he sell this for his wife, then have a restaurant. And in these restaurants, this woman attends tourist people and people from the same place. and this economy than the selling of the products and the production of the restaurant maintain the family. What is the problem when you have a contamination episode? This woman don't have the products to selling, to making food in his restaurant, in her restaurant, and the men of the family don't have the products to sell crabs and cob. So the two founts of money for the family are lost at the same time, almost in the same day. So you have a family with two economical incomes, and in the other day you have a family with zero economical incomes because they have this linked economy. Then it's very good when you don't have contamination because you have good product, you don't have over exploitation of the products because you just take for the restaurant for have like big crabs and big cob. You take just what you need for the restaurant. So it's good for environmental and it's good environmental and it's good for the family. But when you have these contamination episodes, all the family lose the money. So that is why they protest here.
And then Adrian, you had your hand up as well.
I just kind of wanted to put something forward in terms of food security in a climate changing world. Here, the Farmers Field School type of methodology in terms of getting information from farmers and their local indigenous knowledge has really taken off. So you pair that with the scientific evidence that you have, and you have a more holistic way of approaching and tackling the food scarcity within your country and also climate change issues. I was able to do something similar to that, albeit not in, I was more in the climate change education section. And phase 2 of that project, which I'm not a part of, really was able to use that information to do watershed management in the northern parts of Jamaica. I was able to participate in a mangrove replanting exercise because what they've tried to do is to do some agroforestry along with beekeeping in the northern parts of the valley, and then they do coastline protection at the southern end, because what we have tried to do, well, what the organizers have tried to do is take a spring to coast to deep water approach in terms of environmental protection and sustainable livelihood enhancement. So you do the agroforestry in the top part. You do the beekeeping training so that the persons who are charcoal burners in the top part of the valley have something to do. So you whilst you're telling them not to use the skills that are endangering their own livelihood, their own lives really, two, decreasing their crop outputs, because then if you're slashing and burning and using charcoal, then you're really depriving the soil of the recycling of nutrients, and you're also releasing more carbon dioxide into the air. Albeit Jamaica and the rest of SIDS offer less than a percentage to the carbon emissions worldwide. But if you're doing that in your own locality, then you need something, and we're saying to them, you need to stop doing this. We need to also provide them with skills in order to produce their own food and food for their surrounding communities, and also to earn money. So one of that technique that we did was to put in the organizers put in an agroforestry program, complemented that with the beekeeping approach. So they now have two earning elements other than charcoal burning. So they now don't have an excuse to move on. What you also do is that they're on a river, and a part of this topic was how water affects agriculture, right? So if you're not having land slippages in the river anymore, you're protecting soils and you're protecting the stream contamination. Because you have bees there, you have to use cleaner ways of running your farm, like less pesticides, because of course if you have the bees there then and you're spraying pesticides near them, you're gonna knock yourself out. And so from that farmer field school type methodology where you're teaching them the scientific side, but you're also getting them to input their own local indigenous knowledge that have served to protect them all these years. And I give you one more example. One of the driest areas that is Jamaica's breadbasket is a parish called the St. Elizabeth, right? They have very scarce water resources. I mean, they have the Black River morass in that parish, but where the person's farm are some of the driest areas in the parish because those lands are elevated, right? What they have done is they had a technique before they learned about the climate change issue where they would use mulch to cover the soil. So what happens there is that the water takes a lot longer to dry out. So, and then I think some place in the parish got some help from our local UNDP office to put in drip irrigation. So now that you have those kind of technologies meshing with the indigenous knowledge, you have more, their scallion production is now only threatened by pests and diseases. So you're reducing the water element in a place that is pretty much arid, but then you're also incorporating the local indigenous knowledge to preserve a way of life.
That is great, because in Chile, normally people use one of just technology or just indigenous knowledge. Like the combination is very interesting. Thank you. That will be useful here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you all for your contributions and awesome ideas. The brainstorming is so cool, and I love hearing all the examples from around the world of what's working and what's not working, because by learning from each other, that's how we're going to be able to, find the right solutions for each of our communities. Something that works in Jamaica won't necessarily work exactly the same in Chile, but if you can adapt it with, the Mapuche local knowledge instead of the indigenous Jamaican knowledge, then you'll be able to find the solutions that work best. So thank you all for your presentation. Our next call is on the 30th. I'm trying to remember who it is. I think it's also at 14 o'clock GMT. Let me see. Yes, also at 14 o'clock. It'll be Ecosystem-Based Solutions and Adaptation Methods by Younes from Morocco. So that'll be our next call. And then, then we have 2 months left and we're done. So it's going by really fast. Thank you all again for your presentation. Thanks, Michelle, Jinky, and Magdi. And if there's one last thing we can do before we sign off, the director of Care About Climate has been asking if I could get another climate sign picture with everyone on the call. So if you can hold up your left hand, then it'll look like a C. Wait, how come half of them are C's, half of them are backwards? I don't get it. Wait, what? Jinky and Michelle, is that your left hand? That is your left hand.
My left.
Why is that backward? That's so weird. Is mine? Okay, mine's backwards?
To me, it looks backwards, yeah.
Oh, okay. That
looks right. Does mine still look backwards?
Everyone's looks backwards except for Magdi's now.
Oh.
So weird. Okay, Adrian, you're good. Jinky, you're good. Michelle and Alvaro, could you switch?
Yeah.
Okay. Right.
Um,
Smile. Wait,
okay.
Magdi, switch back. You had it right.
okay.
That's so weird. All right.
Okay.
Shoot, I have to hit 2 buttons to do this. Shoot, how am I gonna press down? Okay. It's not doing it. I have to hit 2 buttons and I can't do it one-handed. So I'm just gonna be out of it.
Just use imprint page. Isn't your computer at the side of Supermere, you know?
It doesn't
Imprint page.
seem to be working, but maybe I'll find it later. All right.
It's in the side of Supermere, mujer. Por Dios.
That's what I'm hitting, but okay. I don't know what's going on. Hopefully it worked. All right, we're gonna assume one of those worked because I hit a bunch of different buttons to get it. All right.
Okay, just go to some,
I gotta find where
at
the
least
screenshots
go for Paint and put there
Yeah.
with control plus B. Y pegas la imagen.
Okay. Perfect. Okay.
There were.
I think. I'll let you guys know if it does. Okay. I figured out. All right. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye.
Okay,
Bye.
Sarah
Have a
versus
good rest of the day,
computer.
everyone else. All right.
Okay, laptop 1, Sarah 0.